Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So I'll be reading from Stillness Flowing. Keeping to the pattern, I'll be doing some vignettes from the chapter From Distant Lands, part 4 on the nose. Facing the facts. Luang Por showed much compassion for the difficulties of his Western disciples, but he could also tease them when they became self-indulgent. On one occasion, he mimed wiping imaginary tears from his eyes and saying tragically, "He's my father, I'm his son," before chuckling and shaking his head. The performance left a deep impression on Venerable Wat Pah Pong, for whom it was an example of the way Luang Por saw through the self-important attitudes that Westerners are especially prone to, how it needlessly glorifies and increases suffering. Ajahn Chah recalled being a part of a group of monks helping to bathe Luang Por. As our many hands lathered his limbs and torso, he said to me, "Santa Chitto, did you ever bathe your father this way?" Though I'd learned, sometimes the hard way, not to take this kind of question at face value, I followed what seemed a safe path and referred to differences in culture to explain why I never had. Then he said, "That's why the practice is so difficult for you." His simple words hit me very hard. Many of Luang Por's most memorable teachings involved putting monks in positions where they were brought face to face with their defilements and had no choice but to let them go. The reactions to praise and blame were a fertile ground for such instruction. Ajahn Viradhammo spent his first rains retreat at a branch monastery and, while he was there, memorized the Patimokkha. Chanted at speed, the text takes some 45 minutes to recite, and learning it by heart is a formidable undertaking. He returned to Wat Pah Pong at the end of the year with a sense of accomplishment. But being a young monk, he assumed it would be a long time before he would be given the honor of reciting the text alone in the midst of the whole Wat Pah Pong Sangha. Luang Por light-heartedly asked if I would chant the Patimokkha, fully expecting that I didn't know it. I surprised him by saying I would give it a go. With considerable performance anxiety, I chanted the rules in a fairly decent style, and Luang Por heaped praise on me. Getting so much praise from Luang Por was no small thing, and my heart swelled with happiness and pride at the honor and attention I had been given. A fortnight later, Luang Por commanded me to chant again. This felt a bit strange, because it was not a request, but I thought I would be able to show my stuff once again. Nervous as always, I set forth with the introductory chant, but, within a few stanzas, Luang Por was tugging at my outer robe, and telling the monk beside me that this fellow who is chanting stinks. He said, "Doesn't he wash his robes?" My powers of concentration were limited at the best of times, and this interruption was quite upsetting. I lost my focus, made some errors, regained my focus, and started again. For the next hour, Luang Por continued to interrupt my concentration again and again. Each time, I became more confused or angry, and I had an extremely difficult time finishing the recitation. I can't remember if the other monks were chuckling to themselves, but it was obvious that Luang Por was offering a very direct and difficult teaching. You like praise and success, but when you are blamed and you fail, you suffer. Go beyond praise and blame to be free from suffering. A natural perfume. Luang Por soon realized that humor was amongst the most effective tools he had at his disposal for teaching his Western disciples. It allowed him to point out their mental defilements in a way that they did not find oppressive or fill them with self-aversion. Encouraging them to see the humorous side of their frustrations, irritations, and anger, he showed them how to laugh at themselves and so let go of identification with their foibles. But he did not do this by cracking jokes for cheap laughs. Instead, he pointed out the absurdity of their cravings, regaled them with outlandish analogies, enacted hilarious anecdotes. Monks might not always laugh out loud at his sallies, but it was hard for them to keep a straight face when he was in such a mood. Venerable Warapanyo remembers one teaching given to an American monk named Gary that became something of a legend. Gary had a girlfriend back home and thought that he might want to go back and marry her someday. He had entered monastic life without a sense of long-term commitment. Then the Dear John letter came. She had married someone else. I wasn't there at the time, but others said Gary was pretty upset. One day, someone mentioned it to Luang Por. With his merciless compassion, he advised Gary to write to the woman and ask her to send him a vial with some of her shit in it. Then, whenever he thought of her with longing, he could open the vial and smell it. On one occasion, a rumor spread that the communists were putting some chemical in the noodles that made penises shrivel up. Luang Por advised the monks their penis starting to shrink, then they should tie a big knot in it so it wouldn't disappear completely. Words. Luang Por shared with many people of his culture a love of language and wordplay. His Dhamma talks were often studded with puns and unorthodox usage. So it was with real delight that he observed the misadventures of his Western disciples in their efforts to learn the tonal Thai language. Gaffes were frequent because, although Thai grammar is straightforward, the tones are a minefield. The word lek, for example, pronounced in a high tone means little, and with a low tone, iron. One day, Luang Por told a young Australian monk to go and fetch the monk who lived in the hut with the iron door. When the monk returned many minutes later, unsuccessful in his search, he was confused by a gale of laughter when he told Luang Por that all kuti doors seemed to be the same size. The more embarrassing mispronunciation would enter monastery folklore. Of these, the most notorious occurred when a monk, advising Luang Por not to visit the West in December, thought he had given the reason that there would be a lot of snow around that time of year. What he actually said, and in the crudest of terms, was that it wouldn't be a good idea to go right then given the seasonal profusion of dog vaginas. When teaching his Western disciples, Luang Por took their varying language skills into account. Apart from the formal translated Dhamma talks that he delivered, he often gave short teaching couched in very simple phrases to prevent misunderstanding. The exhortation to endure, O Ton, and to let go, Bloi Wang, were soon known to everyone. He used easily grasped metaphors and similes. You're like someone who wants a duck to be a chicken, he might say. Often his words would be unexpected, apparently off the cuff, and the recipient might walk away thinking, did he just say what I think he said? What thing is this mind? He once asked rhetorically. No thing at all. Bugbears. A recurring debate in the transmission of Buddhism to the West has been over the extent to which the Dhamma can or should be separated from the cultural context, or trappings, in which it has been transmitted over the centuries. A Buddhism tailored to the West, untied to its Asian customs, has been a goal for many pioneers. But for Westerners who made their way to Wat Pah Pong, submitting themselves to monastic training implied an acceptance of the whole Thai Buddhist package. For some monks, adapting to the Thai style of doing things could be irksome. But that's not the Vinaya, it's just Thai custom, was a common grouse of the monks admonished for a faux pas such as using a head pillow as a sitting cushion. Few of the Thai monks made any distinction between those parts of monastic custom traceable to the Buddha's time and those of more recent and local provenance. A Western monk showing disrespect for any one facet of training could be seen as looking down on the whole thing. Luang Por exhorted the Western monks to be humble, respectful, and observant in the face of things unfamiliar to them, to let go of attachments to their old ways. A bugbear for a number of Western monks was having to participate in ceremonies that seemed to owe as much to Brahmanism as to pure Buddhism they had expected to find in a forest monastery. Although Luang Por would not cater to the superstitious beliefs of the local people, neither was he a fundamentalist, and he was willing to perform one or two of the more benign local ceremonies as a way to draw people towards the Dhamma. Ajahn Chah, one of those who arrived at Wat Pah Pong looking for a meditation teacher to instruct him in Vipassana, received a rude shock on his first day. After the meal, a small group of village folk spread a white cloth over their heads. The monks all around me started chanting, and Luang Por began dripping melted candle wax into a bowl of water. After the water was over, After the chanting was over, he sprinkled this holy water over the heads of the now uncovered villagers. I was shocked by what seemed to me to be out-and-out superstition, but then my eyes caught Luang Por's. To my surprise, he had a mischievous grin on his face, like a young lad having a grand old time. I was completely disarmed, but the real point hit home after the ritual finished and he gave a Dhamma talk, when I noticed how attentively the villagers sat listening. Kickstart. If a monk felt that he had been singled out to receive a particular teaching, it left an especially deep impression. This happened to Ajahn during his first rains retreat at Wat Pah Pong. At that time, a more senior monk would often seek to engage him in conversation during their return to the monastery after the daily alms round. As they walked along, this monk would expound on the faults of various monks and spout what seemed an endless stream of complaints. Ajahn found this monk conceited and hypocritical, but, being junior to him, felt unable to rebuff him politely. By the end of one of these walks, he would arrive back at the monastery feeling annoyed and out of sorts. But one day, as he passed Luang Por Chah's kuti reviewing all the faults of this fault-finding monk, his sour mood dissolved in an instant. A broadly smiling Luang Por, practicing his English, looked out and wished him a hearty good morning. That evening, Ajahn went to Luang Por's kuti to offer him a foot massage. When the bell sounded for the evening chanting and monks started to leave the kuti, Luang Por told him to continue the massage and asked someone else to extinguish the candles. Quote, "The moon was just coming up, and I was listening to the monks chanting. As I massaged his feet, Luang Por sat there silently in the darkness, meditating. It was really inspiring. And then, suddenly, he lifted up his foot and kicked me in the chest. I fell back on the floor. He pointed at me and said, 'There, one person says something that you don't like and you get upset. Somebody else just says good morning and you're happy all day. Don't follow your moods. Don't be attached to other people's words.'" You can go. Luang Por was habitually reticent on the subject of psychic powers, and there are few occasions in which he was clearly seen to demonstrate them. But one such occasion did occur when a certain Australian monk received a letter from home informing him of his father's death and asking him if he would come back for a visit. This monk's energy and short temper had earned him the nickname amongst the Thai monks of Venerable High Octane. He was a fiercely intelligent man who considered those who disagreed with his, often rather cynical, views to be guilty of wishful thinking and unable to face up to the hard truths of life. Although he had a great respect for Luang Por, he could be withering about anyone who he perceived to be putting on their teacher on too high a pedestal. Belief that Luang Por had psychic powers was, to him, a good example of the woolly-mindedness that he found so annoying. When the monk arrived at Luang Por's kuti, letter in hand, in order to ask for guidance, Luang Por was talking to some other monks, and so he sat down to wait. After a while, Luang Por turned to him and said, "What would you do if your mother wrote you a letter and invited you to return home for a visit? Could you handle it?" The monk was completely taken aback. He had not mentioned the matter to anyone. He realized that Luang Por was asking if he was confident that he could sustain his practice of the Vinaya outside of the supportive conditions of the monastery. "I'll try," he replied. Luang Por said, "You can go if you want." The smell in your bag. Venerable Aranyabo was another monk with an overly critical mind. After returning from a branch monastery with a familiar litany of complaints, Luang Por said to him, "Aranyabo, you've got dog shit in your shoulder bag. Do you realize that? Everywhere you go, you sit down and there's a bad smell. So you think, ugh, this place is no good. And you pick up your shoulder bag and go off somewhere else. You sit down and there's a bad smell again. And so you get up once more, taking your shoulder bag with you. You never realize that the smell is coming from the dog shit in your shoulder bag, and so you carry it with you wherever you go." It was a variation on one of Luang Por's favorite teaching stories, the mangy dog who blames wherever he sits down for the itching that torments him. Venerable Aranyabo listened to this blunt admonishment with a face that was presumably more sheepish than canine. Venerable Warapanyo commented, "There was never any bad feeling when he talked to people like this, because we knew it was from a pure, loving heart. He was offering us, right then and there, a clear and simple solution to our problems, one which he had obviously practiced. His words and his whole being simply said, "Let go, now." Part 5, Knower of the Worlds, Results of the Practice. Although the overwhelming majority of Westerners who entered the monastic life of Wat Pah Pong were male, there were also a small number of Western women who came to train as Meishes. Chief among these was an American known by her adopted name of Kamphah, who arrived with her husband Paul after fleeing their home in Laos ahead of the communist takeover in late 1975. The couple decided to try and stay for 5 years, with the proviso that, if at any time both of them wanted to leave, then they would do so. However, in the case that one wanted to go and the other wanted to stay, then they would both carry on and endure through their difficulties. It was challenging for both of them, but they survived the 5 years. At the end of every year, Luang Por would allow Mechi Kamphah to go to Wat Pah Chah for a few days, where she would have the chance to speak to Paul, by then known as Venerable Titapo. Mostly, their relationship was confined to the odd clandestine note, secreted at an agreed spot in the forest on the Meichi's route to the kitchen. In many ways, it was harder for Mechi Kamphah. As a nun, she had much less access to Luang Por, and in the Meichi section, her inspiration could easily waver. But Venerable Titapo did not find a monastic life easy either, and sometimes he would probably have preferred the distance from Luang Por that his wife resented. By the late 1970s, Luang Por had become a more grandfatherly figure, but the old fire and ability to give corrosive admonishments would occasionally resurface. He could also accomplish the effect of a scolding without speaking a word, as he demonstrated one day when he caught Venerable Titapo breaking a key monastic regulation. Private supplies of tea, coffee, sugar, and so on were forbidden at Wat Pah Pong. Everybody was expected to be content with whatever communal drinks were provided. However, a number of Western monks, Venerable Titapo included, persuaded themselves that they were a special case in this respect, and if they were discreet enough about it, boiling a pot of water in the forest and having a cup of tea together was a minor, harmless indulgence. Every now and again, they would meet at Venerable Titapo's kuti, where an ancient black kettle was secreted. One day, Venerable Titapo received a parcel of fine teas from his sister in England. In the late afternoon, he made a small fire in the forest behind his kuti, at a spot where the smoke would not be visible from the path, to enjoy a first cup of the new batch. But when an involuntary shiver passed through his body, he quickly turned around to see a motionless and stone-faced Luang Por watching him. It was the proverbial nightmare come true. Luang Por walked over to the illicit supplies, lifted up his walking stick, and knocked over a few jars of teas with a crash, spat on the ground, and walked off in silence. Luang Por spent most of the second half of 1979 overseeing the renovation of the monastery in Bon Khor, where he had spent his first years in robes. Towards the end of the year, Venerable Titapo was assigned as his attendant. One day, a group of Thai visitors began to praise the Western monks for their renunciation and dedication. Luang Por agreed, yes, his Western disciples were accomplished. Many of them could chant the Patimokkha. They're all very intelligent, he paused dramatically. Except for this one. He pointed to Titapo. He's really stupid. Afterwards, Luang Por asked Titapo slyly if he got angry when he treated him like that. Titapo said, "How can you get angry with a mountain?" Luang Por was delighted. Laughing, he turned to one of his novices and said, write that down. Eventually, the 5 years were up. In the last few months, Kamphah's growing sense of isolation in the Mechi section had been exploited by a fundamentalist Christian monastery. This had culminated, somewhat bizarrely, in her conversion. "Maybe she's right," said a deadpan Luang Por, startling Ajahn Sumedho, who brought the news. After their departure, ex-Titapo adopted his wife's faith. The couple sent letters to Western monks, lamenting what they called the aridity of Buddhist spirituality, and exulting in what they believed to be a shared sense of Christ's presence. One of their main complaints was that after 5 years in the Wat, they could see no tangible results from their practice. No matter how much they had tried, life had always seemed to remain pretty much the same. These comments were passed on to Luang Por. Then, one day, a photo of the couple with their first child arrived in the post. It was shown to Luang Por. He looked at it for a moment and then said, "At last, they've seen the results of their practice." We'll end there.
Just regarding the story where the Ajahn Chah knows the contents of that, or apparently knows the contents of that letter to the Western monk, I think I've heard that part of the training at Wat Pah Pong was that the abbot would basically read everybody's mail ahead of time, and I don't know if that was, that would be another. That'd be another explanation of how he knew what was in the letter. But again, I also trust Ajahn Chah's competence at discerning what's going on. So
I don't think he necessarily would have read it.
Yeah.
The sort of honor system.
He couldn't read English either, so that's one issue. And also, like it said that I also heard that would be Western monks, because one he can't read English, but that he also didn't want to have someone always translating letters from English to Thai for him. So with the Western monks, it just wasn't done.
that makes sense.
Thus have I heard. I can't recall that.
Just in terms of these stories sort of changing, like telephone game over time, the first time I heard the Abhayagiri tale, I was told that one time a monk was bowing to Ajahn Chah, and Ajahn Chah kicked the monk in the face. And that was it. That's the whole thing. And at one point I asked Ajahn Pasno, I'm like, can I just clarify a story I heard? And he told me the real story. The real one. It made a lot more sense. I'm like, wow, that's really heavy. Kick him in the face.
I never heard the kicking in the face version, but I heard the story from Ajahn Yanadama, exactly the same, almost verbatim as it was read. It was Titapo the first, and there was soon after him, there was Titapo the second at Ajahn Chah, who I believe was Anagarika's with Ajahn Amaro. Was a marijuana dealer, and came with a big stash of marijuana and buried it in the forest at Ajahn Chah, and then disrobed and tried to find it later, and couldn't find it.
I like the story Ajahn Prateep shared about Ajahn Pasno in the early days when he got a letter from a girlfriend and he found it in the trash. Ajahn Pasno just...
Ajahn Prateep got a letter from...
He did, yeah. He shared it at the opening.
Ajahn Concrete?
Congress.
Ajahn Chah got a letter from his girlfriend?
Correct. Or not from his girlfriend, but from some girl that he knew.
Yeah,
Ajahn Pasno through.
teenage girl
Yeah.
was found in the trash saying like something like "Tom Concrete, I love you" or something.
That was in his talk. Yeah.
It was really funny to see his on Por's expression. He just started laughing. It's like, yeah, it was me.